What I'm going to take you through today are some predictions, some hopes for what the future of work might look like, and set you a challenge around what I think your role is in building that future. And the reason your role is important is a lot of the commentary on this talks about the dystopian view of the future of work, which is us being the pets of the robots, the skies are grey, it's all doom and gloom. Or the utopian view, this 8-hour working week, we'll have lots of leisure time and everything's going to be wonderful. But the thing is, whichever one of those you subscribe to, it belies the fact that the future hasn't been prescribed. It's not been written, and we're not waiting for it to arrive. It's up to us to build our future and decide what future we want. So instead of getting carried away with a dystopia or a utopia, I want to set you a challenge of how we go about building our collective future. Now, the first prediction here is around place, around how we think about our physical environment. Something that back in the day was very secondary to a lot of other conversations. Even for us at Atlassian, when we started talking about work, we always focused on these three things. People, right? The skill sets, the capabilities, growth mindset, fixed mindset, the style of the people that work with you, how you learn and help them grow. We talked about practices, not really process, but practices and ways of working. How do you get humans to work together? And no surprise, as a technology company, we focus quite a lot on tooling, the products that enable you to work in a certain fashion. And for a while, we thought this was the recipe of effective teamwork, but it fundamentally misses something. It misses the fact that we are in an environment. There is a place, there is a space in which we operate, and it has a massive impact on how we work. Even more so in the future, how do we think about how that space is congruent with our ways of working and our people? Now, we've gone out on a limb and we've been working with both the government and local authorities around Australia to create meaningful workspaces for Australia so that we can have a thriving ecosystem, so we can have an economy which is renowned for innovation and technology and the future of work and future growth, rather than our historical growth around mining and banking. How can we build a prosperous Australia? We need places where people can innovate and create and work together. But how do we do that? And why is it even a challenge? So I want to give you a quick example, something that we're quite familiar with, which is remote work and distributed teams. Every single day in my life at Atlassian, I work with people that aren't physically next to me. Their space, their physical environment is different to mine. So how do we build that in a way that we are peers and we are partners and we're on a level playing field? Now, one of the ways we've done that with our highly distributed teams is through technology. This is a team where actually some of the people are in the same location, but we have a rule. If one person dials in, we all dial in. That way, everyone is a remote worker. So instead of using the word empathy, which is very easy to say and quite hard to do, we all get to be on the same level playing field of dialing into the meeting. So if a future workplace exists where remote work is prolific, where teams are distributed around the world, how do you go about building a place where co-located teams can thrive, but also your remote team members feel like they have a sense of belonging and they are a member of the team? The most important thing here on this prediction isn't about being best of breed in any of these. I don't care if you're best of breed technology or best of breed space. I don't care if you've got the best bean bags or ping pong tables or you've got the smartest people. The successful organizations are the ones that get these congruent, where they are consistent. So if you're going to hire people and say, I'm hiring you because you're curious and you're smart and you're a collaborator, and then you put them in partitioned offices and lock them away, you're not going to get collaboration. So the challenge is, how do we not only make space a first-class citizen, but congruent with the rest of the organization? Number two, I think the reason why you're all here, learning and growing. The idea of organizations and people not being about knowledge acquisition, but about learning new skills and applying them. Now, there's a whole lot of stats that we can hide behind, all right? We are the privileged people. If you are here today, the chances are you're privileged. If you're on stage today, you're really privileged. And we need to acknowledge that privilege and realize that while stats like this tell us that technology's created more jobs than it's taken away in the last 144 years, it hides the mass displacement. It hides a multitude of sins. The largest employer in the US right now is taxi driver or truck driver. Which role do you think is the most likely to get disrupted in the next 10 years through autonomous vehicles? Now, I'd love it if those truck drivers and Uber drivers would retrain as UX designers in Melbourne or San Francisco, but it's highly unlikely. So how do we look at displacement? And also, how do we look at education when, for me, when I graduated in the year 2000, that was the end of my education? Because my parents said to me, now you've got a degree, you go and work for 40 years, and then you retire. But the reality is I've learned more in my last year of work than I've learned in the previous 19 before that. How do we build lifelong learning systems? And who owns it? In the US recently, Jeff Bezos announced just shy of $1 billion of money to retrain Amazon employees who will likely get displaced by the technology they are creating. As they create autonomy in their factories and in their supply chain, they will displace their own employees. They are retraining their employees right now for future roles. This is going to happen. How do we get ahead of this? And how do we understand what those skills are? Now, the World Economic Forum do great research on this. They publish it all the time. It ends up on LinkedIn. And not many people do much about it because when you look at the skills of the future and you map them to the current education system, you tend to want to headbutt a wall or at least hit yourself. Because we are training kids today like they're in a factory and that they're going to rote learn something and apply it, when in reality what we want is curiosity and creativity. We don't really just want STEM, we want this combination of STEM and arts. The curiosity of the philosophy alongside the science and the technology, the engineering and the maths. The two together, the diversity of those opinions, that cognitive load is a great experience. Very different than having like-minded people. And that's a conversation that doesn't just have to occur in the education sector. There are millions of people currently employed worldwide that think they have job security because they've done a job for a period of time without realizing the disruption that's about to hit them. And so we owe it to our communities, to our society, to our business to understand which workers are going to be displaced. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist. Rio Tinto 5 years ago rolled out autonomous vehicles in the Pilbara mine in Western Australia. We know what happens when autonomous vehicles go into a workplace. We can extrapolate that and start to understand the impact. Interestingly, in that example, they had a net increase of employment because they needed more software developers to build the autonomous vehicles. They needed more maintenance for the vehicles because vehicles don't need a rest when they have an autonomous driver like humans do. The vehicles didn't deviate, so they had to change the roads. A whole lot of roles got created. But back in the day, learning was linear. You did it, you finished, you applied it. We are in a messy, complex world right now. And we need to sign up as individuals for lifelong learning and sign up for the fact that as this displacement happens, it's up to us to prepare for that future. So not only is this at the levels of the education system, and how do we understand that, but even how we hire today when we say you must have 20 years experience, you must have a degree, you must have these things, when really, when you interview someone, you're like, are they smart? Are they curious? Can they ask questions? Can they communicate? The things we look for in an interview are often very different from the bullet points we put in a job advert. And then how do we look at those future skills and build for tomorrow? Because we can't wait for these skills to come around. We can't wait for it to happen. We need to build the muscle right now of unlearning old habits and rituals and freeing ourselves up to experiment and explore and be curious like we naturally are as humans. The reality here is the people that thrive in this environment are the ones that never stop learning and growing, but it's not about acquiring. You have to rid yourselves of the habits and rituals of the past to give yourself the space, the time, the freedom to actually embrace the new learning. Anyone in the room from HR? I apologize in advance. Not a massive fan of HR people. I've never enjoyed being called a resource. It just doesn't fill me with joy. I don't know why. I should get over it. I'm 42 now. It's just a trigger word. And so I'm not a resource that can be played or deployed. Right? I'm a person. I'm a human. You hire me for my curiosity. You hire me for my wisdom and my ability to challenge and provoke, not my ability to comply. And I think the reality of the future of work is HR needs to fundamentally change who they are. And we are seeing organizations do this right now. They are moving from the policy pushers to the people enablers. And it's a fundamentally different role. And it's a great role. It's a very exciting time. Because the future of HR, if virtually every business I speak to tells me our biggest asset is our people, well, it's about time we started acting like that and treating them like our biggest asset and investing in them. Investing in the fact that our businesses in this world of volatility have to be adaptable. We want our businesses to evolve and stay relevant. We want our businesses to have agility, not necessarily agile, but agility, nimbleness. They're the things we want, and yet we build policy and procedure to create compliance and adherence. We do the opposite of the thing we intend. And that's because we have this construct, which is extremely dated but very sticky, being the organization chart. It's what every HR system is based off. It's what a lot of finance and strategy is based off. What department are you in? What function are you in? And that's fine if you're in a stable, consistent, very predictable business, which most people I speak to aren't. The beauty of most organizations is cognitively diverse cross-functional teams coming together who don't give a shit about the org chart. They don't care who they work for. They really care who they work with. And it's not just one team that you're in this modern world. You're a member of many teams. So yeah, you might have your main team that you work with, but in this cross-functional world, there's a variety of people you work with different goals, different outcomes, and different missions. So how do you get a sense of belonging, a sense of team cohesion when you're working in these various environments? When you're spinning up projects and initiatives, you're spiking on something and then probably quickly moving on. And then how do you celebrate? How do you make sure you recognize these teams to understand that? Now, the reality is one of the things that's happened here is mass change from digital transformation. A phrase that often makes me squirm because it's a little bit cheesy and consultants use it all the time. But the reality is the transformation that's happening through technology is seeing a democratization of teams. It's no longer that IT sits over there and we've got a dev team over here and then we've got a business team somewhere else. Right? There isn't this segregation anymore. The reality is to ship value to your customers, all teams have to work collaboratively together across the organization. It's about lateral communication and lateral collaboration. And in that world, you can scrap your policies and process and realize that ways of working, ways of unleashing your team's potential is the value that HR can bring. And it's not just HR's job, it's every leader in the business's job to understand new ways of working, how we build a muscle around innovation. How do we build discipline in a world where we can always be connected, but we shouldn't always be connected? How do we genuinely have a model of flexibility in the workforce? All these things are gnarly, complex problems that are easy to say and a lot harder to deliver on. When we do that, the beauty is that amazing things happen. HR becomes a force multiplier. We had a great example recently where our HR team reinvented the performance review. We are a company that is obsessed by teamwork. Our stock ticker symbol is team. Our mission is to unleash the potential in every team. And once a year, we did an individual performance review. And it was a little bit ironic. But thankfully, our HR team got on it and said, no, let's be the change we seek. Let's build a performance review based on you. So a third, your individual performance. A third, the Atlassian values. So how you do what you do. And a third on how you contribute in your team. And are you a force multiplier in the organization? Now that as a performance review process was wonderful. The real beauty was the behavior change that it drove when people realized that teamwork was a first-class citizen. Because cognitive diverse teams are not easy to work with because they fucking disagree with you. They're really annoying. Like-minded people are wonderful, they just agree, but you get nowhere fast. So when you get these cognitively diverse teams, you need to get through that initial friction where it feels like a tax and push through that to realize that diversity is an investment. And we found that through rolling out our new performance review. Number 4, people, planet, purpose, and profit. The quadruple bottom line. It's very rare for me that I see an article from an organization saying, we made so many $1 billion this year, and I'm like, cool, I want to work there. You sound like a great place to work. We are obsessed by monetary values of success, and we forget about the consequences or trade-offs that monetary drive brings. Now, I'm not against profit. I don't work for a charity, I work for a profitable company. But profit isn't the only thing we exist for. All right? We have to realize that as part of our role that we care about also the planet and about people and about purpose. The outcome, the reason that we actually exist. And when you balance those 4 things, you get a very different frame of reference about how we think about the future of work. Not about the capitalist sense of how do we make more money, but how do we do this in a sustainable, scalable, an effective manner. Now, that's easier said than done. I'm very fortunate to work with two CEOs who actually live by what they talk about here. Scott, who does a huge amount of work in philanthropy, and Mike, who's, if anyone is ever on Twitter or LinkedIn or watches the news, will constantly talk about climate change until he sees the change that he wants to see. And so this is something not only that we're passionate about, but as an organization we're standing for. And it's an interesting time for organizations. Historically, organizations focused on the things within their four walls. And we've gone through that same phase at Atlassian. It's easy to talk about your success, the number of employees you've got, the number of customers you have, the amount of dollars you make, that if we're deadly honest, are vanity metrics. No one really cares about them. What they really care about, and this is the transition that we're seeing right now, is the impact your organization has and the thing your organization stands for. And those happen outside the four walls. And the reason they're quite scary is you can't control them. You put them out in the ether and you have to trust the whole network works. You have to trust the belonging, you have to trust the social responsibility. We have no choice to do this. Number 5, wellness is always on, but it's not. Because we have connectivity, we think we need to always be on, and we don't. Most team books talk about high achieving, high performance teams. And they talk about the things that we know to be good: outcomes, delivery, execution. But what if we just look at the other side of the coin for a moment and say, what about emotional well-being? What about the mental state of our people? What about the fact that 50 years ago, if a CEO said they were going for a run, you'd ask them what they were running from? Because the only people that went to gyms were weightlifters and bodybuilders, and then gyms became normal. I sincerely hope that the normality for us is that wellness in the workplace becomes a norm. It stops being a taboo and is something that we care intimately about. Moreover, it's something that I think we should prevent rather than wait for it to go wrong and try and cure. The danger here is I don't know if we're in the epidemic already. There's every chance we are, because if you look at the stats, we have reasons to be concerned. Our attention has disappeared. We are working longer hours than ever before. Virtually every business I talk to, and statistically most say they're dealing with more complex problems than ever before, and automation has taken away the mundane tasks. We are increasing the cognitive load on our people, and we are not doing anything, we're not doing nearly enough about it right now. I want us to be in a world, and we need to be in a world where we genuinely invest in our people so that we realize that always on means always drained. We have to find a way of balancing. We have to find a way of building the discipline. And the question there for you is, how are you leading? What tone do you set? How do you role model the behavior that you need people to see? Number 6, this has just got to happen. The workday has to disappear. The construct of the workday existed in an industrial revolution that happened 60 years ago, when we'd clock in because we got paid by the hour. That's not true anymore. In theory, technology invented a world where we could be sort of various, but we're not doing it yet. We used to clock in and clock out. We don't need to. We used to work Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. We really don't need to. And we used to work in person. You had to physically be on the production line. You had to be in the factory. That's very rarely the case these days. The reality is very different. That you should work when you're feeling productive, creative, curious, when you've got your mojo and vibe. All right? And you're not constrained anymore because we're in distributed teams. I work with teams across India, the US, and Europe. If I work 9 to 5, I will never speak to some of my colleagues. But that doesn't mean I work the day and the night. It means I should choose the hours when I can be the most effective to do the job I'm being trusted to do. And technology enables that, but we need to change our behaviors and constructs to understand that. Most of us aren't working on a production line, but we still act and behave like we are. And we're not, we're knowledge workers. We are paid for our wisdom and curiosity. We're paid for our energy and our enthusiasm. You are not clocking in and clocking out, and you should not be constrained by 9 to 5. Because if you are, I guarantee you work the hours outside of that as well. And that's not cool for you or your mental health. Because we want to generate ideas, we want to generate value. And the only way we're going to do that is to actually challenge the way we think about these constructs. Number 7, change management. Not one of my favorite topics. And because of that, I think it's going to take on a new meaning. The new meaning of change management is going to be around behavior change. We have a habit, a tradition of celebrating the individual. We put individuals on pedestals. But if you look at the greatest human achievements in history, they were teams. NASA put a man on the moon. Teams win sporting events, but we celebrate the individual. How do we understand the behavior change that's required to work with other people? It kind of seems obvious, except every single university graduate I speak to, and I said to them, what was the worst part of university? They're like, the team project. And the reason being is we're all the only person that pulled our weight. I've never met the slacker. I did all the work, I got the grade, and you're like, really? I'm not sure you're that self-aware. So how do we understand the nuances of teamwork? How do we understand behavior change? How do we find a way of doing this in a world that is really volatile? It is complex. There's huge amounts of uncertainty. We haven't got the foundations we used to have anymore. So we want to drive behavior change around inherent uncertainties. We can't give people the confidence we used to give them. But to do that, we really need to understand the nuance of humans, of people, of intrinsic motivation, of how we're wired and how we work. And the example I want to give here is collaboration. Collaboration is massively misunderstood. It's not a tool, certainly a buzzword that consultants sell, but the reality of collaboration is it's a behavior. The behavior is, I care as much about other people's opinions as mine. The behavior is, I'm going to close my mouth and open my ears. The behavior is, I'm not going to respond and correct you. I'm going to argue like I'm right, but listen like I'm wrong. They are all behaviors. The number of senior leaders I work with that have built or bought the best collaboration tools in the world and then tell me the tools are shit because no one in their organization's collaborating, and you're like, they're petrified. They daren't share. Collaboration is a behavior. And I believe as leaders, your role is to drive behavior change in the future of work. Innovation's a behavior. If you're in a high-tech space, incident response is a behavior. Collaboration we've already talked about. Agile's a behavior. Customer focus is a behavior. Organizations say, we're customer-centric. What behavior are you encouraging and rewarding to actually be customer-centric, or have you just put posters up around your office? The two are very different. We need to get to an understanding that the world that a lot of us were born into and a lot of the companies that exist, the traditional businesses, were geared and governed towards consistency. The more consistent you were, the more profit you made. That is not the world we're in today. We have to be curious, we have to be creative, and that is a behavior change. Because creativity probably doesn't have an immediate ROI, doesn't have an immediate payback, but it's about exploring and experimenting to discover what could be, rather than doing the certain that's right in front of you. Number 8, continuous feedback becomes the norm. If we want to be agile, if we want to evolve, we have to constantly seek feedback. But feedback's painful. I used to call in a previous organization, we had something that they called the annual performance review that I called the annual ambush. It would happen in December where my eternal leader would tell me something I didn't do in February, which was why I didn't get a pay rise. I'm like, cool, I've had 10 months where I could have done something about that, but I haven't because you never told me. He's like, well, there's always next year. That wasn't feedback, it was an ambush. How do we get into a model if we want to evolve constantly? Once a year is not the time frame to evolve in. These are transformations. You find something out, you're a year behind. The reality is we need to get way more incremental with these conversations. And it's not just conversations around performance, it's around understanding your role as a leader, as being a mentor and a care of the people around you. How do you generate a multiplier model where you're not constrained by the 8 hours you do a day, you're just constrained by the impact you have on many others, and those others have on other people? It's the day you realize you're a role model, and that's the most important part of being a leader. The interesting analogy that I'm sort of playing with here is, I think the new model of evolution for people follows the Lean manifesto around product development. As people, we should consider ourselves to be products. We should build a new skill or muscle, we should deploy it, we should measure it, we should get feedback and learn from it, and then go again and go again. To evolve, you have to open your ears and eyes to hearing constructive feedback, take action, and realize that when you try something new for the first time, you're probably going to be shit at it. And that's the fun part. Do it again, try it again, seek feedback. And the more we do that, the more we will grow and learn. Number 9, customer experience takes center stage. This has actually already been happening for a while in a whole lot of organizations, because the world that I grew up in my education system used to talk strongly about industries. Industries had big barriers between them, both barriers to entry, but also clear delineation between you're a supply chain company, you're a technology company, you're a telco. Those lines are really blurring right now. Mainly because everyone wants to be a technology company, but also because of the combination of skills. Is Amazon a technology company or a supply chain company? Well, actually, they're both. They're really good at supply chain. They're also kind of quite good at technology. So how do we understand this network effect where those lines blur? The important thing is to realize is that it's actually irrelevant how you structure your organization and what you call yourself. The real thing that you should care about is the experience you give to your customers and how you make that experience delightful every single day. Because we compare experiences not by industry, but by the last experience we had. I compare Australia Post and how they deliver packages to Uber. They're in completely different industries, and that is not a fair comparison. But my experience on the Uber app of instant charge, the transparency, the way the transaction occurs, that's my expectation now of every online transaction. So I don't care what industry you're in, my experience bar has lifted. And number 10, the thing that I think we can all impact today, which is the end of productivity. Potentially controversial, given that I work for a company that sells team productivity software. Now, I'm not saying that our software is bad. It's not. It's awesome. And I'm not saying team productivity is bad. I'm just saying our over-focus and index on team productivity is the illness our economy is suffering right now. Productivity is a measure defined by GDP, was invented a long time ago when the world was very, very different. It measures your net GDP, your contribution to the economy in profit and financial terms. It doesn't understand borderless business. It doesn't understand software because software has no zero cost. It doesn't understand a lot of things, but it doesn't understand the trade-off to the planet, to sustainability, to the ecosystem, to climate. It doesn't understand a lot of things. I had the pleasure recently of working with Huggy Rao, a professor at Stanford, and he shared this story with an audience of people. How do we reframe the fact that we don't own people for 8 hours a day, but we borrow them for 8 hours a day, and our job is to return them in a better state than we inherited them in? A fundamental reframe of how we think about employee well-being, and not how can I make you more productive. There has not been a single morning in my life where I've woken up and thought, fuck, really hope I'm productive today. It's up there with compliance. I've never woken up and said, I want to be compliant. I really like to adhere to some policy today. It doesn't happen. So instead of being productive, how can we be more effective? How can we stay relevant? How can we stay in the moment of doing the things we need to do, which is often scrappy? Productivity is all about bits. It's all about production. It's all about growth. If we want to grow our GDP by 3% year on year, we double our population in 24 years. But we don't know that the planet can sustain that. We have no idea whether we can do that in a sustainable or scalable fashion. So instead of this over-focus on growth, why can't we just pause and say, let's realize we're not doing it well yet. We're in the best technology times in the world. We've got the smartest people on the planet in the world right now. We are allegedly living in the most amazing time, and I actually think we are. If we wake up and smell the roses, we're living in a brilliant time. But if we measure productivity, we're living in a terrible time because it's not getting better, it's getting worse. We're not getting more productive. We're actually just trying to work longer hours, and we're getting worse at it. So instead of working more, how can we find a way of saying the real measure of our impact is these 4 things? Our ownership to the planet, to our society, to the economy, to the future of work, is to have an impact and an outcome around not just profit, but our purpose of why we exist, what we want to stand for, what are our opinions, our people that we care about and invest in and grow and develop, and living our best life every day, and our planet, and leaving it in a better place than when we inherited it, which is by no means a simple task. I think the things you're going to hear at PauseFest are going to take you through this labyrinth of we could do this, we could do that, we could go over here, we could do over there. There are 1,000,001 opportunities. But here's the challenge for you. If there is more to life, and I think there is more to life than productivity, I fucking hope so, otherwise I'm in the wrong place, then how do we do it? How do we not get fixated on trying to predict the future? Is it dystopian and is it utopian? And the answer is you. You see, this future isn't predicted. It's not written down. It's not predetermined. If you want to create a great future, you are the only person that can do that. Your actions every single day, the behaviors you role model, the transactions you make and the trade-offs you decide, the way you turn up to PauseFest this week will help determine the future of our collective world. So my challenge to you is, if you want to unleash your organization's potential or your team's potential or anyone's potential, have a long, hard look in the mirror and unleash your potential first. And if you can sign up to build your future, you'll be the multiplier that you want in the world, and everyone else will enjoy it. Thank you very much.